Hi, my name is Willie Lawson. Let me start with this strange thought. There was a time in the church where a major third wasn't just musically suspicious, it was morally dangerous. Harmony itself, harmony, was suspect. Certain intervals were believed to pull the heart in the wrong direction. Too warm, too emotional, too human. Now we laugh at that now, but we shouldn't because we're still doing the very same thing. We've just changed the instruments. It's not a major third that causes trouble now. It's the guitar or drum kit or heaven forbid a saxophone. And people will swear up and down that their objections are theological. But if we're honest, most of the time they're not. They're formational. Now, I've had the honor and privilege to lead worship in a setting people like to call a contemporary setting. And I hate that term because it doesn't tell you anything about theology and everything about era when it is, okay? It assumes that newer music is automatically thinner and older music is automatically deeper. And that is a false assumption. And yet, inevitably, someone will say, we need to get back to them old hymns. Those are biblical. Well, sometimes they are. Often they are not. Many hymns are not scripture. They're poetic theology, shaped by the concerns, debates, and blind spots of their time. They paraphrase, interpret, expand, and sometimes speculate. And that doesn't make them useless, but it does mean age does not equal authority. Old does not necessarily mean biblical, and new does not necessarily mean shallow. Here's another myth that repetition in worship is a modern downgrade. Historically, repetition was not a concession to laziness, it was a pastoral necessity. Early worship was repetitive because people needed to participate. Truth was repeated so it could be learned, memorized, embodied. The Psalms repeat, heaven repeats, holy, holy, holy. It's not said once for clarity, it's said again and again because some truths are too big for a single utterance. Repetition isn't the enemy of depth, inaccessibility is. And sometimes the most theologically rich music in a service is also the least singable, which quietly turns worship into a spectator sport. Now, that brings us to the instruments. Now, instruments did not support worship in Scripture. See, we are of the mind, or we've been told or taught that instruments are just accompaniment, right? They were worship. Psalm 150 doesn't ask permission. It doesn't justify itself. It doesn't hedge. It commands praise through sound. Trumpets, strings, pipes, cymbals, clashing cymbals. There's no footnote that says, well, as long as it doesn't feel like too much. Instrumental music was never filler. It was the offering. Sound itself was prayer. And that's why instrumental solos make some cultures uncomfortable because they bypass words. They bypass doctrinal gatekeeping. They go straight to the heart. Sound, praise, whether we approve or not. which brings me to my instrument, the saxophone. So for a long time, the saxophone was treated like a serpent in the sanctuary, shape and that kind of stuff. Not because of its range or tone, but because of what it represented. people saw the saxophone, in jazz and blues, improvisation, incredibly emotional. The saxophone didn't just play notes, it carried history. And that history made certain people nervous. Now, here's the deal. The problem was never the instrument. The problem was that it couldn't be easily controlled. It can't be easily controlled because it breathes, it bends notes. It sounded like a voice telling the truth. And churches that preferred order over honesty didn't know what to do with all that. So instead of asking, can this glorify God? They asked, where have we heard this before? And the answer frightened them. So much to talk about here. Let's talk about David. Because I see there is a TikTok creator, the Holy Note. You've seen him, the Holy Note. And sometimes he has clips of Pentecostal churches or whatever. And where he's just like, nope. So let's talk about David. Because if David showed up in a church this morning, I guarantee most congregations wouldn't have any idea what to do with it. Because scripture says David danced with all his might before the Lord. That's not a polite sway. Tapping on 1 and 3, how annoying. It's not a tasteful movement. That's not something that stays in your personal bubble. It was physical. It was loud. It was undignified. And embarrassed people. Which is why his wife despised him. Not because he sinned, because he shattered decorum. He embarrassed status. He refused respectability. And God's verdict was unmistakable. David was honored. His critic was not. That should trouble us. Because if David danced like David danced today, he wouldn't be praised for his passion. He'd be asked to tone it down, take it outside, or save it for youth camp. Which forces an uncomfortable question. Do we want biblical worship, or do we want worship that behaves? Here, I want to insert a personal story. I was in the praise band, not at the church we're in now, in the church I was in before. It's been a long time since this happened. And it was an 8 o'clock service. I can't tell y'all what 8 o'clock service are like. Standing behind that saxophone at 7:30 during getting warmed up. Wow. But I don't know. I can't tell you what happened because I don't know what happened. But what I do know is that it was the most amazing, outrageous, incredible praise and worship service that I had ever participated in. It was amazing. So when we got done, Pastor Bernard, who was one of the praise and worship leaders, I heard him leave the stage behind me. And what I heard him say was, I feel like a caged animal as he ran off. I found myself in one of the ante rooms, sitting in a chair, not quietly weeping, but sobbing, bent over, sobbing. It was amazing. Uh, I my wife was in the congregation, and she saw that I didn't come sit down. She wondered where I was. She came looking for me because she was worried about me, and she found me there, and I was just overcome. It was such an incredible experience. And it wasn't just that we played so well, and it was something much, much more important because we were absolutely, when I say we, I mean we were undignified. We were absolutely undignified. We were physical. We were loud. And God blessed us. Now, everything is not about feelings, but sometimes you get a feeling. God's not against feelings, but it was absolutely amazing. I will never, ever forget that morning because we were completely undignified. We were completely laid out. And I'm telling you, that morning, that service made a difference in the direction that I took personally. Now, here's a pattern that people keep repeating. At one point, remember, I talked about this a little bit ago. Harmony was dangerous. Harmony. You look back at Gregorian chanting, which is sacred music, most of it. Um, one voice, one melody, right? One voice. Not. It was much later that there were two voices, and you know what? You never got. You never got voices that were moving in opposite directions. One was going up while the other one was going down because it wasn't done. And if they weren't the same pitch in octaves, they were in the fifths. They were never in thirds because harmony was dangerous. Later, because of the very same reason, organs, because of their volume, they were controversial. Because choirs replaced congregational chanting. Then we took the singing out of the congregation and we put it on the platform. We're only going to have these people sing, right? You can see how that, now, because now you have a special group of singers, you can have some, I don't know, virtuosity. So when people say, God, I miss having a choir. Oh, while people listening to the choir, people aren't participating. Right? Then guitars were worldly. And I hear this all the time. Can't tell the difference between worldly music and church music. Well, you can if you listen to it. Yeah, you can. And then, of course, drums. Oh, drums. For the very same reasons, guitar. Now, we just talked about solos, instrumental solos, praising. It's a sound that they use to praise. Now, being a saxophone player, I believe that part of my voice, not just my singing voice, part of my voice is a voice that I use through my instrument. Now, I also believe that some people who play piano do the very same thing, or they play bass or guitar, or they play trumpet. Or trombone or whatever. It's worship. But solos, because they don't include words, became performance. Because every generation baptizes its comfort and then calls it reverence, and then reaches for scripture afterwards so they can go ahead and wrap it in whatever particular scriptures that makes them feel okay about it. Now, here's part of the things that people won't say out loud. They are about formation. People sanctify the sounds that discipled them and distrust the sounds that didn't. People grew up with an organ or a piano in a church, no drums, no guitar. They learned those songs, and that for them is church music. They may not have gone to a place where it was just organ and a choir. They didn't have an organ. They had a piano. It was never tuned. Oh, those pianos never tuned. And they sanctified that sound that discipled them. It was that crazy Pentecostal church across the river. They had a piano and a drum set and a guitar. No, right? But that's a human thing. But it's not the same as biblical. And the church gets into trouble when it mistakes preference for principle. Folks, worship was never meant to be sterile. It was meant to be embodied. It was meant to breathe, movement, sound, repetition, response. From the beginning, worship was messy, loud, communal, and participatory. Not impressive, not controlled, participatory, which means sometimes worship will feel uncomfortable, especially to those who equate stillness with seriousness. But stillness was never the standard. Sincerity was. One more story. One Sunday night at the church that I was talking about. This is before I guess I joined the worship team. Um, it might have been the day that I gave my life to Christ. It might have been the same night. There was a pastor at this church, and he was from South Africa. His name was Smiley Pappenfuss. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And we were singing. It was praise and worship time, and we're singing. And I noticed this very loud, very loud, because Pastor Smiley is like 6'4". There's this really deep voice, but the man couldn't hold a tune in a bucket. The man couldn't hold a tune in a above ground pool. Okay, he had a bucket. But you know what I heard as he caught my attention? I heard the words, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord." And when I looked at him, his eyes were closed and there were tears streaming down his face. And he was making a joyful noise. He was praising God. I got something because that was sincerity. It wasn't impressive. It was not controlled. It was participatory and would have made some people uncomfortable. It wasn't still, but it was sincere. And when someone says an instrument doesn't belong in worship or solo is suspect or movement is distracting or repetition is shallow, what they're often saying is this sound or this doesn't sound like the faith that formed me, formation. And that's honest. But that's not universal and it's not eternal. God has survived modes, tunings, intervals, temperament, organs, choirs, guitars, drums, reeds, brass, and breath. God is not fragile. He has never once checked the publication date of a song. or the pedigree of an instrument or the respectability of a dancer before receiving praise. If instruments have praised God since the beginning, if repetition is formed faith since the beginning, if embodied worship has always been biblical, then maybe the problem isn't that worship has become too expressive. Maybe the problem is that we've confused control with reverence. And God never asked for control. He asked for our hearts. This is the first video of this new channel. If you are interested, I don't know how you'd have found it. It would have been completely by mistake, been completely random. But if you're interested in more, please make a comment. Please subscribe. I'd be happy to answer questions that you have. I don't want to get into a huge debate on any of this stuff. I just want to offer a different perspective. And I think that offering different perspectives is an important thing. Have a great day now. Be well.